All right, what is up? Hope everyone's ready to rock and roll. I'm ready to rock and roll. Let me get my mic up here where it belongs. Great. So what we're going to do this time, adjust my camera a little bit. What we're going to do this time is we're going to spend a little bit of time reviewing Unit 2 and culture. In particular, the stuff that we didn't get to last time, about 2 Thursdays ago. I spent some time looking over Unit 1, 2, and 3. But we never even got into Unit 3. And then Unit 2, we got about to Thomas Malthus, kind of rushed through the demographic transition model a little bit. And then we didn't get to migration at all. So I want to hit migration, and then I want to get as far as we can into Unit 3 and hopefully get through with it today. Remember, what I'm telling you guys is like surface level stuff. I mean, I wouldn't say it's all surface level, but what I'm saying is that like I can't possibly hit it all in just a quick, hour and a half, 2 hour review. So my goal is to fill in as much as I can to give you what you need to know in terms of going back in to fill in the gaps on your own during your own study time. I say at the beginning of all these reviews, your number one thing you want to do is practice multiple choice. Practice FRQ is what I meant to say. Practice multiple choice as well. But FRQ, you guys have access to all the released APHG FRQs. If you just Google APHG released FRQ, that's going to take you to the College Board website where you guys can access this stuff. Form some study groups, get some friends together, y'all plow through them together, and then use the marking guide, the grading rubric, to actually figure out how you did. You guys can have some pretty good insight on that. Also, the FRQ that I modeled was done on February the 28th. It was an agricultural-based FRQ. If you are a 501+ member, you're definitely going to want to go back and look at that. It's good to know what to expect in terms of how to format your answer and also how the readers are going to read them. And that's the main focus of what I did on that day. So if you guys are struggling with exactly how to formulate your response, that would be something that I would definitely do. Let's look at some questions. Could you explain counter-urbanism? Quickly, because we're going to hit that on Thursday, all right? But what you're looking at is a trend involving people moving away from the city. Okay, so you have during this Industrial Revolution period, which we're going to hit a little bit on Thursday, you got people moving into cities looking for jobs. This is because agriculture enabled more people to have more food, and there was labor needs in the cities, and so people went there. However, after a while, you start to see this movement of people from the city center where jobs were to kind of out into these suburban regions. All right, and then eventually some of your richest people, and you can see this on some of your city models, like the concentric zone and the sector model. Some of the richest people begin to actually live a little further away. Okay, so the idea of the opposite effect, going from the city to kind of their suburban or country areas, is going to be your counter-urbanism. How long is the live stream? This one right here will go as far as 2 hours if I need to, but I don't know. I mean, we might not go quite that long. Feel free to come in and out as needed. All right. So if you guys only have an hour, stay an hour and it'll be beneficial. If you only have 30 minutes now, but then you'll have 30 minutes again later on, feel free to do that as well. Please explain physiological density and arithmetic density. Okay. So to do that, let me go ahead and open up my share screen. Okay, so let's go and take a look at it. Looks like my slides are still loading. Might be easier just to, well, sorry, y'all. I have some, here we go. So when we look at those things, I'm going to present it here. Your arithmetic density is just the number of people divided by the amount of land in the country or in the space that you're looking at. So this can be looked at, all these numbers can be looked at different scales, like a lot of things in human geography. You can look at different scales. So you can look at a country level, which is how I think probably most of us have pitched it. You can also look at it in terms of an individual city. So arithmetic density is going to be the amount of land area divided by the amount of people divided by the land area. All right, so New York City will have a higher arithmetic density than the country as a whole. But when you're looking at agricultural density, it is the number of farmers per unit of arable land. And that right there is going to be a map that kind of shows what this might look like. I'm sorry, this here is per person. So physiological density is the number of people per unit of arable land. So let's look at this chart here. This here is in the Ravenstein book. It's in the textbook that most of you use. And if you look at Canada, for example, we know that Canada, most of the people in Canada live fairly close to the U.S. and Canada border, and there's about as many people in Canada as there is in the state of California. So with all that land, California's arithmetic density is extremely small, about 3 people per square. I don't know if this is in kilometer. Okay, so square kilometers, as we see here. The physiological density, meaning the people divided by the unit of arable land, is 65. And then farmers per unit of arable land is as low as 1. That might be rounding up. All right. In the United States, number is a little bit worse. Now, if you look at Egypt, the arithmetic density in Egypt is 79. I mean, most people live near the Nile River, right? Because Egypt's a great big desert. But then if you look at the physiological density, remember this is people divided by arable land. In other words, farmable land. Well, the number is extremely high because even though they all live near the Nile, most of Egypt is not farmable land. So most of it's desert. The number is going to be extremely high here. So this here is what we mean by the why of where, right? You think about the arithmetic density being 79, that seems like there's enough space in Egypt. But then when we think about the fact that most people live along the Nile, this number here helps us to understand why that is. And so on and so forth. Notice Japan's, all of Japan's numbers are going to be high. They don't have a whole lot of resources. They don't have a whole lot of arable land. A lot of that stuff gets imported. Okay. Let's see. What are some causes of rural to suburban migration? All right. Rural to suburban. Look, people are going to move however they want to move. The way that I've always told my students to think about these types of interregional migrations is to think of it like this. All right. During the Industrial Revolution, you've got people moving from rural to urban. From there, you had people kind of moving from urban to suburban, or a little bit further from the city. And they did this if they were wealthy enough to be able to commute, or if they didn't have to commute all the time. So the people that would have moved from the city centers during this time to the suburban regions would have been like your entrepreneurs or your factory owners or your upper middle class. Okay, most of the poor people lived near where they worked in the city centers during that time, and other poor people obviously would have still been farming, or maybe even some less poor people would have been farming. But in terms of looking at these migration patterns, I would look at rural to urban, then urban to suburban, then sometimes urban to rural, and more recently, kind of a trend is with this new urbanism and gentrification, all these different things you guys are talking about in the urban geography unit. You are starting to see in countries like ours where more and more people are moving from suburbs and rural regions back to urban. It's kind of a recent counter trend that might have been happening as recently as since maybe 2000, 2005. So I wouldn't think, in other words, in reference to your question, what are some causes of rural to suburban? I would count that as kind of the same as rural to urban, and a very recent thing. I hope I answered that question right. Can we please go over language? Yes, we're going to do that this period. Are we going over language? Yes, we're doing that this review. What's an easy way to differentiate the different types of densities? You just got to memorize it. I was talking to someone about this earlier, but my way of remembering it is when you think about agriculture, you think about farmers. So agriculture density is farmers divided by farmable land. It just makes sense to me. Physiologic that word doesn't make me think about people, but I would say as long as you know what arithmetic density is and agricultural, the only one left to know is physiologic. So that's how I would think about that. Can you summarize S curve and J curve? Are you talking about in reference to population growth? We can do that in just we can do that right now. All right, let me find where that is in here. It's somewhere right here. All right, that right there is going to be and honestly, I think that I understand your question to be in reference to something like showing exponential growth in this way, and so and we're talking about this with Malthus too, or we kind of looked at this a little bit, but when you're graphing out these trends, this one here would be what we're going to consider exponential growth. Okay, now this isn't exactly what I would call a J curve. So I'm not sure exactly what you're referencing there. If you could be more specific, maybe I could tell you more. But when something like this happens, it represents an exponential increase in something. Okay, whereas Malthus, and I don't have this graph on this presentation, but Malthus looked at linear growth of food in reference to, I guess, in conjunction with this exponential growth of your population. And so when you put the two together, you see where there's going to be a point where there's going to be more people than we have the capacity to feed. And so that's what feeds into the Malthusian theory, and we'll review that in just a moment. Do you know the possible topics of FRQ? Honestly, no one knows the possible topics of FRQ. The best thing you can do is guess. Again, it would just be a random guess. You never really know. One thing that I can say is that trends tend to show that they won't use a topic twice. If they do, it won't be like the exact same way. So, for example, last year there was a question on different types of diffusion. All right, so your diffusion of popular culture words. There was also a question on gentrification. So you can pretty much rest assured that those topics aren't going to show up on the AP exam, at least not as a topic in and of itself. But then again, you really never know. You never know. It's a game for us AP Human Geography teachers, always trying to guess what's going to be on it. I know that if my popular guess is always central place theory and the Millennial Development Goals, but those mean nothing in the grand scheme of things because those questions were written a year ago, is my understanding, and they could be on anything. We just don't know until we get a test. Are we going over religion? Yes, we are. Can you explain Malthus' theory and if it's still applicable and what the critics say? We're going to do that right now. We looked at this towards the very end of last review on this topic. But all right, so Malthusian theory. Thomas Malthus, he was an economist. He was also a clergyman that lived about the time that the Industrial Revolution was starting to take hold in Great Britain. And so he believed that human population was going to grow so fast in conjunction with the, I guess, in comparison to the amount of food we can produce, that he thought, as I just kind of looked at a little bit, that we were going to come to a point where we didn't have enough food to support the growing population. Now, this is because, and rightfully so, if you look at the population growth chart that we just now saw, that this right here this is not natural when you look at how we grew over the course of all of human history. So this right here goes back to what, 10,000 BC, at the beginning of this is like Ice Age stuff. And notice the population really barely even moved. Very, very little real change in population growth all the way up until about the time of Christ. And then after that, it rose a little bit. But and this here is around, you got civilizations and stuff here starting to flourish in places like Europe and Asia and all that. But then about 1750s, when we entered the second industrial revolution, that gave us more food and started moving these people into cities because they were looking for jobs and opportunities. So I said it before, I'll say it again, the reason why population started to grow, if you look at the demographic transition model, is because people stopped dying. They stopped dying so much. In particular, children lived to be adults. So remember, total fertility was about 7 or 8 kids on average per woman. The birth rate didn't go down in stage 2. This is stage 2 here, okay? Stage 2 right here. The death rate dropped. So this red line is the death rate, and it drops considerably as there is more food, and also eventually medical advances and things like that cause people to live longer. So all the pink here represents your natural increase. In other words, your population growth. And so eventually in stage 3, the birth rate starts to come down to the point that it balances out and population stops growing. But that's what Malthus is noticing. So Malthus is noticing that there was a ton of people being born. They're not dying like they used to. They're living on, which is great. But then how are we going to take care of them? He also noticed that the people that were having the most kids tended to be the ones that had the least ability to take care of it. They tend to be more poor. And so he predicted that eventually, once we get to our carrying capacity, in other words, the amount of food that our environment is going to allow us to have and resources and all this, it's going to get to a point where disease, famine, war, conflict, competition, all these different, what he calls natural or positive checks are going to occur. It's going to keep the population in check, keep it from going any higher than it possibly can. Now, the problem with Malthus is he didn't account for how much our agricultural output was going to improve during the Industrial Revolution. And so far, we have not come to the point where we can't sustain our population growth with the amount of food we can produce. But there are others, like Paul Ehrlich, I don't think I've got him in here, for example, that we call these people Neo-Malthusians. And they believe that we're not only looking at food anymore, we're also looking at water. I saw a video that talks about the future of what can we expect in 2030 or 2040. And they were saying our most valuable resource in the world at that time is probably going to be water or clean drinking water, access to water for, in particular, some of your poorest countries already are the ones who lack access the most. There's going to be environmental problems caused by population growth, like our use of CO2 that contributes to global warming, or uneven distribution of food. This right here, if you look at this one here, you can make arguments that parts of the world today have undergone Malthus's predictions. If you look at a lot of your sub-Saharan African countries, like Rwanda, like South Sudan, like a lot of places in that region have undergone political corruption, competition on the basis of ethnicity, competition for access to resources that have led to famine, drought, death, and despair. And so in a lot of ways, you could say that now it hasn't curbed the population growth in that region. We know that most of the world's population growth going into this century towards the end of 2100 is going to be in Africa. But it's still, you can see that a lot of things he's saying on different scales may be coming to fruition or may have come to fruition in certain regions of the world. Optimists are those who believe that we are able to overcome this problem with our food production. You got people right now saying that in the future we're going to eat more insects for protein. A lot of people already do it in some form or fashion. It's a cultural reason why we don't. Nobody wants to eat a grasshopper and think, wow, that's good. I love it when the legs get caught between my teeth. But you're going to see more and more of this stuff ground up into our protein powders or made into protein bars or things like this. So you got people experimenting right now with synthetic meats of all kinds. We're nowhere close to that, but it's extremely expensive to produce. But you've got people thinking already about how to combat the food and resource issue. You've got the Sustainable Development Goals. We talked a little bit about the MDGs in the industrial geography section, but these are goals to create sustainable ways to go into our future of 9 billion people, or however much we think the projections are going to get to at this point. So there's a lot in there. One thing I wanted to mention here is that for agriculture, Malthus thought we were going to have linear growth. In other words, right now we have 1 farm. Tomorrow we might have 2. We might get 3 or 4. But human population, this here would be your J curve, your exponential growth. All right, and he was saying that when the 2 come together, that's when we're going to have problems. So there's Malthus's theory. Is it still applicable today? That was the other part of that question. Yes, it absolutely is. There are still people that say we need to continue to be innovative. We need to continue to find ways to make sure this doesn't happen, because we know that we have very, very finite resources in the world. Nobody can predict the future. He might have said this is going to happen and have been wrong at first, but at what point are we going to truly be screwed when it comes to our access to resources and the amount of people we have? Can I share this Google slide presentation? The Google slide presentation, all the presentations, every single thing that I have here is accessible with the 5 Plus account, which my understanding is it's like $5. I know we got 2 weeks into AP exams. Some of you guys might be doing multiple AP exams. $5 to get you access to everything. So it might be worth it. If not, definitely you can take notes and do all those kind of things. What are Ravenstein's 5 laws of migration? We are about to get to that. What is the gravity model? We will get to that as well. Actually, all right, so here's what we're going to do. Let's just take a break with the questions for a second. We'll go back to those in a minute. If y'all have certain ones you want, feel free to upvote them so I can look at those first. I'll make it pop up first. And let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. with the new stuff. All right, so let me close that. All right, so we're looking at migration right now. So the question about Ravenstein we're about to get to. Well, let me talk about population pyramids first. A population pyramid is a graphical way for us to understand the demographic composition of a place. Now, when I say a place, it can be a country, it can be a city. In my class, I used to have my students do a population pyramid for our school or for our particular classroom, and it would look all kinds of weird. They don't have to look like just a perfect pyramid. In fact, a lot of population pyramids don't look like a perfect pyramid. The shape, it can help tell us a lot on the, in terms of just looking at a glance about what's going on in the country. So the basic information that you're going to see on a population pyramid is males and females. One side's going to be males, one side's going to be females. Age of the people in the country or in the place, and the number or percentage. Number or percentage of people per age level. Keep in mind, this is important. My students always would get confused because if there is a percentage, the population pyramid might not look as extreme in terms of its structure. If there's a number, it might look like your younger populations are just ridiculously large. So that makes a difference. Here are some that are done by percentage, and you can see that this country here has a large youthful population. This country here has a large aging population, and this one here has what we call an aged population. In other words, most people in this country are going to be, if you look here, older than 40 or 45 or 50. I mean, there's a lot of people, and they also tend to live longer. Notice over in this way, this here would be what we look at as a stage 2 country on the demographic transition model, and there's not a whole lot of people older than even 50 or 55. I mean, life expectancies are low here. And how do I know that? Because if you look here, this line is about, what, 1% of the population? So you can say 1% of the population is males over 60. Maybe even about the same. So maybe 2% of the population in this country is going to be over 60 at all. In this pyramid, you got a large amount of people in their prime of life. So from 45 to 50, you've got as much as 4 on each side, about 8% of the population just in that age group. So this economy might be bustling. But you can see that the trend is less and less people are having kids, which is going to eventually lead to this, 65 to 70. Now, this is retirement age, and you got up to 3% of just males. So you add that times twice, or times 2, you've got about 6% of the entire population of this country is going to be between 65 and 70. Now, that gets expensive because you got to start thinking about things like Social Security. You got to start thinking about things like retirement. These guys aren't working, so they're not putting anything into the pot. They require, or they depend upon, these younger folks to put money in the pot so that they can have Social Security. If we're not adding to the population, and in this country we're not, all right, you're going to start seeing where there's less and less money to take care of the aged population. So this here is what we call and this here is another example, so I'm going to skip that. But we look at this, we start to see, I don't have it in here, I don't guess. You start to see what we call a high dependency level. All right, so there's a dependency ratio in this country where the younger people, or like really the people kind of in the middle, so I would say between 25 and what, 60, have to take care of all these dudes up here. And they also have to take care of the younger populations, which makes up a very small chunk of the overall population, right? So that's what we call a dependency ratio. And there is an elderly dependency ratio, and there's also a youth dependency ratio, which you would see here. There's a ton of kids, and you can tell by looking at the age structure that they don't have as many parents as they have kids. So what are you going to do with them all? If they play their cards right and they start to develop well and make good sound policies for how they run their cities and give opportunities to these young people, they can have a big workforce. But if they don't, then it might be a good place for people like ISIS to go and recruit troops, depending on where it is. All right, this one here is this comes from my video on the demographic transition model, which is on YouTube if you guys want to go look at that. It shows an example of a stage 2 country. Most of these countries here in sub-Saharan Africa are stage 2, right? The blue countries, which a lot of them are in Latin America, and South and Central America, and Asia, and all that, kind of your Middle East, North Africa region. Those are a lot of your stage 3 countries on the demographic transition. And in stage 4, countries like US and Canada, Australia. And what this means now is that their populations really aren't going up or going down. Now, in the United States, if you watch the news a lot, you can hear where people are talking about, if we don't start having more kids, the population is going to start going down eventually, like it is in most of your European countries. All right, so when I say most of them, Denmark, Italy, Spain, Germany in particular. Japan is also, and South Korea are also losing a tremendous amount of their people as time goes on. So that's what stage 5 means, is that simply there's not enough people to replace the population or even sustain it. So the numbers are going to start going down. A lot of these countries here began doing these pro-natalist policies. They start trying to say, hey, we'll give you all kinds of money. We'll give you time off of work. We'll give the men maternity or paternity leave if they will just have kids and procreate. Because let's put it this way: if you have 100, and I don't know how many people Japan has. I think they have like 100, so about somewhere around 100 million people ish. If they have only 75 million people by 2060 because their population goes down, who's going to fill the jobs? I mean, they in a situation there. So, and this, all right, so there's where I was talking about dependency ratio. When looking at the population pyramid, you can visually see the age structure. And if you got too many old people, it's going to be a economic burden for your younger, I guess, your working class individuals. And here are the positive and negative implications. But basically, like I said, if you have a bunch of youth, there could be a bunch of orphans or lack of opportunity, political corruption. For elderly, not enough people working, no money, no financial support for those people, low replacement rates. But there also is good things, like usually your countries that are high on elderly means that there's enough enough health care to keep these people alive, and that there's usually ways to live long. High life expectancies are one of the indicators of high levels of development. And on the flip side, large youthful populations mean you could have a large workforce in a few years when those kids grow up. All right. Now, another thing too that I didn't even mention this earlier in the year when we were covering population, and this is a big deal. This is another one that many AP human geography teachers think is just a matter of time before you see it on the AP exam, and that's the epidemiological transition model. So there's 3 different versions, more or less, of the DTM, the demographic transition model. Demographic transition looks just like population change over time. The epidemiologic transition takes that same information and relates it to the emergence of different types of diseases over time. So if you look at this, stage 1 is going to be the stage of pestilence. You've got things like bubonic plague, famine, smallpox. Now, if you go back for a second and we look at the demographic transition model here, all right, stage 1, birth and death rates are both extremely high. So people were having tons of kids. There were also, many of these kids were dying of things like starvation, of things like bubonic plague, and all these different stuff that we don't ever have to deal with anymore. Smallpox and all that. So disease resulting in very high child mortality prevented high population growth in stage 1. Today, there is no stage 1 country. There might be something that we would consider stage 1 on a very, very small or local scale, but there's no actual country we're going to put in stage 1. They all are going to be in stage 2. All right. So according to our epidemiologic transition, what we start seeing in stage 2 is more and more people moving to cities. This is the process of urbanization. There's more people left farming lifestyle or a country lifestyle in the rural areas, and they went to get opportunity in the form of working in factories in the cities. So it's associated with growing cities and urban concentrations of people, combined with extreme amounts of pollution and unplanned cities. These cities grew so fast, people weren't thinking about like safety and regulations and pollution and sewage and all that. They were just throwing it together because people need a place to live. So this is where you start to see stuff like cholera. And I don't know if y'all remember looking at Jon Snow, not the dude in Game of Thrones, but like the dude Jon Snow, who was a doctor that lived during the 1800s and combated cholera in London by using basically geospatial mapping of data. So in a lot of ways, what he did would have been able to save a tremendous amount of time if he had access to GIS. But he combated cholera by tracing the people that were drinking from certain water fountains to a particular source, and was able to determine that source was polluted and contaminated with a contagion. Anyway, the reason why I say all this is because diseases like this, they didn't emerge until people started to live in extremely close quarters with all this industrial pollution. So that's where you start to see a different stage in epidemics, and that's what stage 2 is. Stages 3 and 4 are associated with longer life, and therefore you start to experience different types of degenerative diseases. Like we think about in particular things like heart disease and cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, maybe even diabetes, different things like that you start to get once you live to be a certain age, and also once you have access to certain stuff that you choose to partake in that could kill you. For example, a lot of your heart disease, lung disease, and things like this come about because people choose to smoke and they have enough money to spend on cigarettes, which is an indicator of higher levels of development and opportunity, which would be consistent with our stage 3, but also, it's pretty dumb. And then finally, you've got stage 5, which we're kind of thinking we have measles, right? You watch the news. Where in the world did that come from? I mean, we have vaccines, literally vaccines that will prevent kids from getting measles. But here we are now facing almost like a pandemic spread of measles because of people that decide they don't want to get their kids vaccinated. And so that would be like your resurgence of stage 1 type diseases. Ebola is another example of that. Tuberculosis is another example of that. So I guess the jury's still out on whether or not we're going to start to see these things. Some of the reasons for it might also be because over time the level of our level of effectiveness at preventing them may wear off as diseases advance or things like that. I'm not really sure, but that's what stage 5 is looking at, and this is the epidemiologic transition model. Using the same process as the DTM to kind of map out epidemics or chart out epidemics in conjunction with population growth. Here is a very blurry picture that kind of summarizes what I just now said. So that's, you can see things like life expectancy and how population and growth correlates. You notice that, again, deaths due to things like cardiovascular disease are very low here, but way higher as people live longer. So I'll let that speak for itself. Ravenstein's laws of migration. So we are going to start a transition in straight migration at this point. And the first thing I want to do is start off with Ravenstein, because this guy comes up with these laws. Now, they are not necessarily laws, okay, but there's a lot of importance in looking at what he says because there's a lot of truth to it. I would think of this as almost like a model. Models are designed to show how things would happen in a perfect scenario based on certain trends, but they're never 100% accurate. I would think the same thing about this. So what Ravenstein is going to do is he puts together these ideas that are pretty consistent over time in relation to why people move. And one of the things he's going to say is that migrants usually only go a short distance. Now, a short distance can be relative depending on what we're looking at, but one way to look at this is if you look at immigration issues in Europe and you look at immigration issues in North America. Both areas have immigration issues, and they're very political issues, right? So in the United States right now, we're talking about building a wall and reducing or preventing immigration altogether with the South. In Europe, the issue is Muslims and Africans and Middle Easterners, people that are way culturally different coming across the Mediterranean because of things like political crisis that results in refugees and then other things. And they're afraid of terrorists and all this kind of stuff coming in the mix. So the reason why we're not dealing with people from those regions is because we're really far away from those regions. we're probably going to start at some point dealing with immigration from those regions. The reason why we're dealing with immigration from Latin America is because we're really close to Latin America. In Europe, they don't have a problem with Mexicans and people from Venezuela right now. They're having a hard time. They're not having problems with people from those countries going into their region, into their individual countries. It's because there's too much distance. So that's one way to kind of look at what Ravenstein is trying to show here. Overwhelmingly, people go for a short distance, and that's just looking at refugees or looking at immigrants that are looking for like a huge shift in their lifestyle to increase their livelihood. In my case, I live near Augusta, South Carolina. I am from Columbia. All right, I came here because they hired me to teach in the county where I work, and so that would be an example of about a 50-minute drive from where I used to live to where I live today. That's a very small migratory distance. Big cities also attract long-distance migrants. So if you are coming from another country or another region, you're going to go to a bigger city, not some podunk place. Usually, not always, but usually. So New York City is a big anchor for migration. Atlanta, Chicago, any of those things. Once you have people go to those regions from your country, chances are more and more people from that country is going to go there. So in New York City, there might be someone who comes from, let's just say Israel, for example, and they start like a Jewish quarter. Or like a ethnic neighborhood just filled with nothing but Jews. More and more Jews are going to go to that particular place because it makes sense. You don't want to go to some place where you don't know anyone or where you don't have any kind of a cultural connection. So that's what we call step migration, right? And then you also have a lot of rural to urban migration because of the search for opportunities. So these people that move internationally are moving from rural areas to opportunities in other countries. They also will move from rural areas to opportunities in big cities within their own country. You see this in places like Bangladesh when people move to Dhaka, which is the ginormous capital there. Each migration flow produces a counterflow. So if there's going to be people moving from Atlanta to New York, there might also be a few of those individuals moving back from New York to Atlanta. Most migrants are adult families or adults. Families are less likely to make international moves. So you see this a lot with guest workers, right? So you got a lot of people from, let's say, Turkey that would go and work in Germany. And they're working there because they can make more money and send it home in the form of what we're going to call a remittance to their family and take care of them. So you don't need the whole family to move for that to happen. Usually you're just going to see adult individuals, mostly men, moving. And that's the last one there, is that most international migrants are going to be young males. Okay, so let's take another quick look at some of these questions. Why are Ravenstein's 11 laws migration? All right, so right then and there, I've got not 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, look, there are some sources that combine certain things. There are some that say you got 11. Most of what I just now gave you is most of what's in the textbooks and most of what's in some of your review manuals. I wouldn't concern yourself with 100% memorization of these, because if you remember it without the ability to apply it to certain scenarios that might occur in terms of migration, it's not going to do you any good. So honestly, I would not be concerned with knowing anything more really than what I gave you here. You might can Google something more and see that a lot of this stuff is going to relate, or a lot of it might be some degree of change that has been made over time as more and more people add to the idea of what Ravenstein has already thought of. But I wouldn't concern yourself with knowing too much more than what I got here. I mean, I couldn't even tell you what else. What are the MDGs? Not gonna lie, I might not get to this today. Okay, so that is scheduled for this Thursday, which is also a live stream event. So definitely come to that. But it looks like Shania put this link in here, and they are very Googleable. I will say that if you Google or go on YouTube and do MDGs successful or not, you'll come up with at least 2 different 3 to 4 minute videos that will kind of summarize a lot of what you need to know here. And then the rest of it would be being able to apply it at different scales and maybe look at different countries. I made a MDG FRQ for my students that specifically looked at Bangladesh. So I would start with these videos here. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail in the next video, but I don't want to take too much time here since our topic is mainly going to be population and culture. What is the gravity model? All right, so I'm on that right now. Literally the next slide. The gravity model is I wanted to talk about Ravenstein first before I look at this, but what you're looking at here is the idea that if you think about gravity like Newton discovered it, stuff is pulled to the earth and gravity pulls it down, right? Because a large mass has just a huge amount of gravity that pulls things down. In the same way, when you look at this geographically and you have a super big city like New York, there is a huge amount of gravity pulling people, in this case migrants, or even people from nearby to that region for whatever service is offered in that city. So let's look at this. Newton's law states any two bodies attract one another with a force that is proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. All right, that's really sciencey, but when you apply that to the like Atlanta and New York City, the word bodies and masses are replaced by locations and importance respectively, where the importance can be measured in terms of population numbers, gross domestic product, and appropriate variables. So, and also down here, underline, the farther apart the two locations are, however, the movement between them is less. So let's look at New York City and Atlanta. They're both very large populations. New York City is our biggest city in the country. Atlanta is I don't even know if it's in the top 10, but it's up there. It's the biggest in that region. And talking about the Southeast, and so because the populations are big and there's not too much distance between. In fact, Atlanta Hartsfield Airport is like the biggest airport in, or I guess the busiest airport in the world is what they say when you're there. I don't think it's the biggest, but it's huge. It's like a massive airport. There's going to be a lot of interaction between New York and Atlanta because they're not that far away, honestly, and also because they're very large populations. There is not going to be as much direct interaction between, let's say, Los Angeles and, I don't know, Columbia, or at least not nearly as much as there would between Atlanta and New York. So let's look at this. The gravity model can be used to estimate things like traffic flow, migration between two areas, and the number of people likely to use one central place. When we talk about that, we're looking at the idea that looking at the central place theory, the center of that node being the place where people are going to go to get their access to services. Now, I will say that the gravity model it may not be 100% legit when you factor in certain special events. Like, for example, in Augusta, during the Augusta National, the golf competition that happened over the first full week of April. Second full week of April. That brings people globally to little old Augusta, where near where I live. That's not gonna be. It's not gonna be like that all throughout the year. But during that one particular event, people from all over the world, from all of these different cities, are going to go to Augusta. And so it might make it look like the gravity model doesn't work in scenarios like this. But then if you think about, and another example of that would be if you look at a place like Orlando, which has all these different amusement parks. Well, even though it's got a certain amount of population and a certain amount of distance, it might have a higher degree of gravity than a city like Atlanta would, but simply because of the types of activities that happen in that city could bring more and more people in there. So I hope that answers this question and does a pretty good job at looking at the gravity model. And I think, let's look and see. I know that I went into more detail. Yeah, so we are going to look a little bit more. I went into more detail on the gravity model in one of my urban videos. So definitely go back and look at that. There is a mathematical way to calculate the gravity between two places. I honestly don't think you're going to need to know that for the test. I think that would be ridiculous. All right, can I go over Homer-Hort's sector model? There's a ton of people that want this. So, I don't have it. I don't have a presentation on that yet. But let me real quick just Google it up. I'm in the process of making my urban geography review right now. I did make, right now, my most popular videos, the videos that are getting the most traffic on my personal YouTube channel are my urban model videos. I made one on the concentric zone. I made one on the sector model and the multiple nuclei model. So definitely, if you Google, let me put this up real quick. Oh, that's not what I want. Yeah, it is. Perfect. All right, so real quick, let me put this up. What have I done? You guys still see me? My computer is doing some weird things here. All right, Professor Dustin, thank you. Professor Dustin Burgess or Hoyt or multiple nuclei model. If you put that into YouTube, you will find my videos on these very topics, and they might be helpful. Let me find real quick the link I just pulled up, wherever it went, and we'll talk about them real quick. Let me just minimize that. I can't figure out where I put where the window is going. Here it is. Nope. My YouTube channel's name is Professor Dustin. All right, let me search it again. I'm not sure where my I'm not sure where it went the first time I pulled it up. All right, so I'm actually gonna do an image, and we're gonna hit them all just super briefly. Come on. Okay. All right, so I'm not going to click on it again because it spazzed out last time I did. But you got the three basic ones, and these are here describing a North American city. Okay, so you're not going to see this exact same pattern in other regions, so keep that in mind. But concentric zone, sector model, and multiple nuclei. And again, I'm going to cover it super quick because this is mainly population, but a lot of y'all want to see this, so I'm going to go ahead and put it up. The concentric zone and the sector model both were kind of applied to the city of Chicago in different eras. I want to say the multiple nuclei model was as well. I can't remember for sure if that's the truth or not. But in the early 1900s, like the 19-teens or I think it was 1920s, maybe 1924 or 5, my boy Burgess, right, comes up with this idea that cities in North America kind of model themselves after these almost like concentric zones or circles around the city center. All right, so particularly in the city center, you've got your central business district. Now, this is if you ever hear somebody say, I'm going downtown, they're going to the central business district, the place where you can find the main services offered by that city. So this is going to be the area where you're going to see all the big buildings, like skyscrapers. If you're flying into a city, you can always see it because you can see where the big buildings are that make the city look super obvious. That's the CBD. Then, in the early 1900s, people, or a lot of poor people, lived in the city center because that's where a lot of the factories we talked about in the Industrial Revolution, a lot of those factories still existed near the city center, and a lot of people were involved in manufacturing then. So your zone of transition would literally be a place where you're going to see some factories and also some of the workers living kind of in tandem. All right. So zone 1 is going to be a CBD, which the main services there are actually manufacturing activities, and then people living in and among the factories where they work. Now, these people can't afford a whole lot of transportation. They have to live really close to where they work. And when you start looking at zone 3, this is going to be your zone of independent workers' homes. So people that are a little bit more well off maybe can afford to live a little further away from the noise and pollution, but they're still pretty much right there in it. I would say that some of these guys are starting maybe to look middle class, but they would still be kind of a little bit on your poor side. But they don't live among the factories where they work. They live a little bit distant from them. Zone 4 is going to be your true like suburban middle class. All right, so this is going to be your zone of better residences. You're going to have people that are far enough they don't have to deal with the pollution directly or with the noise and the bustle of the city center. And then finally, in your ring 5, it's called the commuter zone. Now we're close enough to the city that we're still considered to be in it, but this is going to be way more land available to people that can afford to travel back and forth from the city center to do business once in a while. Usually you got your richest people living in stage 5. The sector model is a very similar process or a very similar kind of idea, but instead of looking at these cookie cutter concentric zones that are really so perfect that how in the world are you ever going to see that in real life, Homer Hoyt around the 1930s going into the 1940s kind of looked at it a different way and said, it's not really these concentric zones as much as it is these sectors that kind of wedge themselves out from the city center. So again, you've got your CBD, a lot of the same activities are going on here as would have gone on in this model, and your poorest people would have kind of lived near there as well. So, but they wouldn't have lived around it, they would have lived kind of nearby it in terms of these different sectors. So if you look at these pink regions here, this is your low rent residential. Well, the orange is going to be your industrial core. So this is the place that they worked, and you got transportation that's going to help to get them there. So people that are poor live closest to places where they worked. It makes sense that they would be in these sectors. Then you look at the lavender color, your intermediate rent residential. This is a little bit more your middle class, and they can live a little further away from the city center and all the industries. And then you look at this purple, that's your high rent residential. Instead of them living in a big circle on the outside of the city, they're going to live together, but kind of stemming from the city, because sometimes they might have business there. The reason why Hoyt looks at this and says this is more the way that the structure of the city is because of things like rail cars, which would go basically back and forth through these regions, which made transportation a little bit more easy. And that would explain why the structure of how the cities are built have changed over time. Then you've got Harris and Ullman, and I think it was around the 1950s, 1960s, they start looking at the next big phase of transportation, which is the automobile. More and more people are able to have it. And so it's going to completely change the way that North American cities are going to structure themselves. Yes, you might have your central business district again, but now you start to see where maybe there is less manufacturing, depending on where you're looking at, and also more access to things like services that people might access. You also might have your wholesale-like manufacturing, so things that people could access here, something like maybe computers or car plants and things like that. And then your low class that would work in some of these areas. Now I just not say car plants. Maybe that's not correct for this model because you wouldn't be a poor guy working there. So I guess we are looking at a little bit more of your older industries, but not anything dealing with like heavy materials like construction materials like steel bars and stuff like this. Your middle class residential is going to be again a little bit further away, but also close enough that people can access the central business district, again using automobiles, so they don't have to form these sectors or anything. You've got your heavy manufacturing more on the outside of the city because you don't have to compete for land and transportation. You can get things to this place easier and more cheaply in terms of locating on the outside, whatever you might need. Once you build it, you might can bring it in whatever you need to do there. Your outlying business district could be like a node, kind of like a we're going to look, these guys also created the galactic city model with edge cities. This right here could be like a precursor to that. And then you got your industrial suburbs going to be close to feeding in labor sources to this region here. So each one of them, I think the multiple nuclei model is a little bit more complex, but the complexity comes as a result of people being able to travel back and forth with better ease due to transportation innovations. So in a nutshell, those are your 3 main urban models. There's also the Latin American city model, which we're going to hit later on. And there's even some review manuals talk about the Asian city and the African city and all that. These 4 and the Latin American city are definitely the ones that you're going to see on the test. The others, I wouldn't spend as much time looking at those as with these. But it's possibilism. All right, so usually teachers will teach it in terms of you've got people that believe in the idea of environmental determinism, which means that people are going to adjust to the environment and there's nothing they can do about it. The environment is going to prevent them from people are going to, in many ways, environmental determinism is people are going to be not adaptable to the environment, but the environment's going to determine what they're capable of. All right. Today we don't believe that. Nobody believes that today. Possibilism is the other side of that, which means that people have the capacity to work with their environment, to literally change the characteristics of where they live to meet their needs, and they might adapt to it in different ways, but one way might not be better than another. And so possibilism means, essentially, in a nutshell, people are able to use the environment in different ways to meet their needs. The environment may be a factor in that, but isn't going to be the determining factor in how those people develop themselves culturally. All right, so that right there is the argument with possibilism and environmental determinism. I think that's covered usually in Unit 1 in your review manuals, for sure. Could you explain the major waves of migration? Yes. Actually, let's do that right now. So let's go back to our presentation because that's coming up. I'm gonna take a quick swig of my drink. Oh, hang on, let me do this. All right. All right, so I didn't put it in here. So I'm gonna try to do. Let's see if I can find a chart that shows it real quick. I can't believe I didn't put that in here. I have it on another PowerPoint that I use for class. I don't know where that is right now. Let's see. Migration periods. While I'm doing this, there is an awesome video on this topic by the Daily. Hang on. The Daily Conversation. And it's called America's Migration History. It's about 25 minutes long in its entirety, but it does a very good job at producing a summary of what we're going to look at real quick. So let's see if this timeline does what we need it to do, and if not, I'm just going to try to say it without a graphic. My internet is moving pretty slow. All right, so hopefully it will come up. If not, I'm going to do my best, and I might not remember the date range 100% exactly. That's the reason why I'm trying to show the chart here. But your first wave of migrants into the United States, first of all, migration to the United States is going to start with exploration. Okay, you got people who are going to move, and let me go ahead and hit the start answering button here so y'all can timestamp it. The migration is going to start with the exploration. People start moving to the Americas. And at first, maybe it's from places like the United Kingdom or places like Spain into the Central America or whatnot. But when it comes to a North American migration, which is really what we're looking at here, I'm just going to go ahead and get this off because it's not going to do what I want it to do. They start moving for things like religious freedoms. Many of them move to the New England state region, okay, so somewhere in the Northeast. This one here will have been around the 16 to 1700s. You're going to start seeing movement from people from Western Europe, all right? And so these are going to be people that, England, maybe the French into their Quebec region, the Spanish a little bit more to the southern areas, including places like Florida. During the time after the country kind of becomes a thing, you start to see migration periods again in the early 1800s. All right, and then during this time, 1800s up to maybe the 1820s or 1830s, you're going to start seeing a wave of individuals from countries a little bit more in your central and southern parts of Europe. So this is going to be some of your Germans, some of your Italians. Eventually, in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, so around the 1880s or so, you start to see more people coming from places like Ireland, and still more people from more of a central Europe, which would have been further east. And culturally, they're not as much the same as people at the time from the west of Europe that would have been more in line with same exact values, more or less, than people in the United States. So there was always some degree of persecution towards these migrant groups and by Americans, and they usually would do a little bit more of the work that was low income. I guess people would make less money doing it. Eventually, these people completely assimilated into U.S. culture, and so when we talk about us being a melting pot as a country, it's because we have a huge and deep migration past, and all of us might look and feel the same today and be centered on our American values, but those values are influenced by all these different migration and cultural groups that came in. Eventually, in the 1900s, you start to see people coming from Asia. All right, so you have a lot of people from China, a lot of people from Japan, and about the time leading up to World War I, there was a lot of pressure towards those groups as well. We eventually closed out the ability for them to come to us because of World War I, as well as migration from Europe. After that, during the period in between, there wasn't a whole lot of migration because of the Great Depression and World War II. After the World War period, you start to see Latin American immigration into the United States for sure, and that is actually started to go down a lot in the beginning of the Obama presidency. I mean, so immigration actually went down as more and more opportunities emerged in Mexico and other Latin American countries. Still, migration is obviously really big and really talked about today. And you've got political problems like what's going on in Venezuela right now that could result in more and more people claiming refuge, essentially trying to get into the United States all the way up to now. So I would say the majority of that time period is going to be characterized by, migration from South and Central America. But you also have more and more people coming in from places like South Asia, Southeast Asia, and just East Asia, yeah, but mainly from South and Southeast Asia. When I say that, I'm talking about people from like Sri Lanka, people from like India, people from Laos and Vietnam and all those different places there. Indonesia, the Philippines. The Philippines is we have a imperial history there as well. Okay, so I hope that does it justice without a graphic of any kind. But definitely, if you guys look at that documentary that I put up there, they do a fantastic job of covering this stuff. Let's see. Will the questions and answers be available after the stream on the free account? You won't be able to access the live streams as a record. You won't be able to access the recording. So I'm going to say no. But if you are a 50+ you can. My understanding is you'll be able to access everything that I'm going over, including this recording, which will timestamp the question. So you'll be able to click on whenever the question was addressed and go directly to that point, which is pretty. I guess would be pretty helpful. I got one here. Are there any countries in the stage 5 of the epidemic transition model? I would say that I guess it would be debatable. I would think that you could see elements of that here. You can see elements of that in many of your European countries. I would say that it'd be the same as stage 5 in terms of demographic transition, but certainly, I mean, we are definitely dealing with measles, dealing with Ebola, dealing with things like this over the last few years. You've a few years before that, when I first started teaching, maybe 4 or 5 years in my teaching, we had swine flu. Anybody have swine flu? Different things like this, we are not invincible against them. Are they killing us by the 100,000s? Absolutely not. It just depends on what your perspective is. A lot of people think about stage 5 as being more of a hypothetical. We might be on the verge of this, but I can definitely see some evidence that many of these developed countries are already starting to kind of see every emergence in many ways of some of these diseases we thought were gone. And even in, Ebola being something that originated in Africa, near Nigeria, that's definitely not a developed country, but nonetheless. So it depends on how you look at that. I've already looked at the multiple nuclei model with the other two, so for now I'm gonna be done with that one. Are questions on average statistic numbers commonly asked? What statistics are important for you to know? I don't know, because I have no access to the questions that they put on the test. They actually will forbid you all from talking to me about it. But yes, especially when you're looking at development, we're going to spend some time looking at some of the development indicators to go into this, and I would know just offhand a few examples of the big stuff. A perfect example of that, let me show you. A perfect example of that would be, well, my slide's going very, very slow, so I'm not going to overwhelm my computer right now. But that picture that I just now looked at that shows the arithmetic, physiological, and agricultural density, you don't need to memorize those numbers for every individual country, but I would definitely know, be able to ballpark where they are in reference to certain countries. Same for population. I mentioned on the last review, you're going to want to know the 5 most populous countries on Earth: China, India, the United States, Brazil, or Indonesia, Brazil. Okay, in that order. You're going to want to know the 3 biggest cities in terms of population in the United States. That's New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, in that order. You don't need to know like the GDP or GNI or the total fertility rate of literally every country, but it would be good to know some of the bigger ones, and it would also be good to be able to relate it to what we're talking about with spatial context. So, for example, I just showed you guys a few maps that showed stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 countries. In stage 5 of the demographic census transition, you're going to want to be able to pull this information up and know those countries and associate them with that model, and then be able to explain why that is. You don't need exact numbers to do that, but you need to have enough knowledge of what's going on in that country. So, do you have to know all these things? Absolutely not. Do you have to know enough to be able to explain why something happens in that place? Yes. So I know my answer was kind of vague, but you don't need to know it all. And it's definitely not about memorizing those things. It's about applying them to the spatial perspective. So knowing the why of where, and that's what you need to know for that. Are the countries in a certain stage of the demographic transition in the same stage of the epidemiologic transition? Yes, to a degree. I would say that definitely stage 2 of the demographic transition is associated with urbanization due to industrial revolution. That's going to then in turn be related to the outbreak of diseases like cholera, which would be your stage 2 epidemic. So I would say yes to that. However, if you're looking at something like what I was just now talking about with the emergence of stuff like measles and Ebola and all that, the United States right now is considered stage 4. Really, though, when you start to look at stage 4 and stage 5 countries, they're both very, very highly developed, and the characteristics of those in reference to disease are going to be very, very similar. So at your later stages, maybe not as much, but close enough to count. At the earlier stages, I would say yes. Can you go over the why hexagon is used in the central place theory? Maybe in a moment. How about this? Let's take a moment and go back to the presentation. Focus on, because I'm definitely going. I promise I'll get to the central place theory in our urban geography review this Thursday. So let's chill out on that just for a second, and if I get time towards the end, we'll go back and look at it. But I want to make sure I cover this stuff first. All right, so I think I was here. All right, and I gotta move on because I haven't gotten to Unit 3 yet. I don't want to do that. Okay, so inter-regional migration. This is going to be migration patterns within a country or within a region, east to west, north to south. Okay, you can see this right here. These migration patterns from 1995 to 2010. Notice that the arrows got a lot smaller here. This is because of the Great Recession. Many people didn't move. They didn't have opportunities in other regions, and so there wasn't a whole lot of migration. So the numbers had declined tremendously. Today, they're probably a little bit closer to this, maybe not even quite that high. Other types of intra-regional migration, which is going to be from different kinds of places. For example, rural to urban, urban to suburban. Somebody asked about this earlier: suburban to urban and suburban to rural. Those are what we're going to call intra-regional migrations. Yeah, I'm going to blast through this pretty quick, but I do want you guys to know some really good examples of intra-regional migrations. These are definitely some that I would know about on the surface in case you get asked. And the Great Migration. When we talk about the Great Migration, this happened in the early 1900s. African Americans moved from the South into cities in the North and the West. I think I've got a map of that. There you go. That's the Great Migration. You got, again, mainly moving from southern states into places like Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and also some in the West, but they were looking for job opportunities and looking to get away from the Jim Crow South. So today tends to be like a counter urbanization movement where many of the ancestors of these original people who moved are starting to come back to the South. The movement is not nearly as big as the Great Migration, but it's big enough that you can find articles about it. The Trail of Tears was the forced removal of Native Americans from the South to Oklahoma for relocation. And this is a map, it's a blurry map, but this is a map that shows that movement. So all these different Native American groups that lived in these regions were forcibly moved by our government into places here where the climate, the conditions, the environment was completely different. These people here were local groups that lived in tandem with their environment in a very kind of a cultural or spiritual way, and they had to completely change their lifestyle when they moved these places in Oklahoma. But that's intra-regional migration. The gold rush, and then the one I want to spend the most time on, I guess that I want to spend more time on than the gold rush, is that last one. I hope y'all can see that. But China's rural to urban migration from the west or the interior of that country to the very quickly urbanizing east. And the reason why I want you guys to know this is because that's the biggest internal migration to have ever occurred by a landslide. Look at the numbers. Look at these numbers. The volume of flow. You got people coming from, in this region here in China, where the mouse is, it's still predominantly agriculture. People are still predominantly poor here. But if you look over here, you got places like, some of the biggest growing places: Shanghai, Nanjing, Qingdao, Shenzhen. All these places here they have rapidly grown. You can find before and after videos that show, like in 1990, that Shanghai was a little podunk fishing town, and that now it's just unbelievably huge urban center with manufacturing jobs and service jobs and all kinds of things like this. People migrated from the interior of China to the edge, to the coast region here on the east, in an effort to find jobs and opportunities in these quickly growing urban centers. That is the reason for this migration. And over the few decades this occurred, it was the largest inter-regional migration ever to have occurred, with massive numbers. I mean, massive numbers. Let's see. So why do people migrate? Push and pull factors. If you want to leave a place because your country is in political turmoil, right now in Venezuela, they had an election. Maduro won't step down. He was voted out, but he refuses to give up the presidency and let the new guy, whose name I can never pronounce until I see it, come in and be the president of Venezuela. And so many people are leaving that country because that's a big push factor. They feel like it's hopeless. They feel like they might be in danger. The economy is in shambles. Those are all push factors. They would go to a place and because of certain pull factors. So I just mentioned to you guys that I moved to Augusta from Columbia. The pull factor there was Augusta had jobs open, and Columbia did not at the time. I actually took a job teaching in January, so that's the reason why there were no jobs. And then there's three major types of push and pull factors. That's going to be political, environmental, and economic. The main reason people move is to increase their economic livelihood. Number one reason right there, usually. In Syria, here's a major cultural push factor, all right, or political push factor, cultural, political, because Syria is in a civil war. So many of the people left Syria, went into neighboring Iraq or Jordan or Turkey, and they lived in refugee camps. Eventually, they started to migrate into Europe. So in 2014, 2015, you start to hear all this information about this massive refugee crisis in Syria due to their big civil war that is kind of still going on today. What kind of push factor is this? Well, this right here is, by the way, Rohingya Muslims in Bangladesh moving into neighboring countries like Myanmar and wherever else they might be going, because they are being oppressed by the Buddhist majority that represents the government here. So that, again, that's another political push factor. Refugees, many of these people there like in Syria, for example, or in South Sudan, where their country is not safe for them to be in, many of the Venezuelans right now are trying to they're being pushed out in a way that they feel like their lives are in danger if they stay. Refugee is going to be a place where it's going to be a kind of migrant who has been forced to migrate to avoid a potential threat to his life, or if he can't return for fear of persecution. So these right here are refugees. People from Syria, would have been refugees. Internally displaced persons are going to be similar to a refugee, but they don't leave the country. They're still there. So people that in Syria that might have left, for example, Aleppo during the time that ISIS had it, they might have gone to some neighboring city, but they can't get out. So they wouldn't be refugees. They'd be internally displaced. That's the difference between the two there. And yet an asylum seeker is someone who has migrated to another country in hopes of being recognized as a refugee. And here are the like a 2012 map that shows a lot of the refugees here. So this is going to be an old map. The statistics have changed a lot in the last 7 or 8 years. But notice that you've got a lot of refugees coming. It's a source of refugees. Hang on. All right, so I guess the places in purple here have a lot of refugees. I think that's kind of, I'm not sure. I'd have to look and see why Russia is that high on the list. You got destinations of refugees, and look at where they are. Places near where the crises are occurring. It's also Europe. It's also the United States, right? And then you got origin and destination. So these are going to be places where either you got, maybe I wouldn't call them, this isn't going to be showing internally displaced people because it is looking at international refugees, but some people might leave one war-torn country to go to another, or wherever it might be. So anyway, the point of the map here is to kind of visualize where most of the refugee crises are occurring right now, and overwhelmingly it's going to be in Africa and Asia. And again, here's another example. I mean, you got an environmental example right here. So it's not just political turmoil, it's not just economic turmoil, but during Hurricane Katrina in 2005, you've got a scenario where people that the hurricane did tremendous damage in New Orleans. Many of those individuals left, and these aren't refugees. They would be internally displaced persons that moved to places like Baton Rouge, as well as other places all across the country. And many of them came back, and a lot of them absolutely did not come back. Let's see, Emma's got some stuff up here, some comments with so is it correct that immigrant are not included in the demographic transition, only their children? All right, so there is a migration transition that my boy Zelensky, Wilbur Zelensky, comes up with, and hopefully we'll get a chance to look at that in just a moment. That's the third kind. But no, the demographic transition model does not talk about or does not address immigrations. All has to do with natural increase. All right, so it's not looking at immigration at all for demographic transition. Remittances, I just kind of talked about that a little bit. I want to skip it for now. All right, so I do want to. I did a video. It was, I think it's like several years ago, and it does a decent job at covering the migration transition. You might can benefit from that. There was another one I did with it about global north and global south migration patterns. So if you look at the, I don't want to go back in my presentation because, like I said, it's having a hard time loading right now. But if you look at the demographic transition, Wilbur Zelensky applied certain migration patterns, he said, were consistent with certain stages of demographic growth within a country. So in stage 2, when the population starts to grow and people start to move to cities, usually they're moving to cities inside their own country. So Zelensky in the migration transition would have noticed that there's going to be a lot of rural to urban movement within a country, right? In stage 3, also in stage 2, there's going to be people moving from rural areas in that country to cities in other countries, looking for opportunities there. In stage 3, you start to see where kind of the same thing. Mainly people that might be in a city in that one country are going to be, so you're going to see most of your international migration to cities in other countries like MDCs during stage 3. In stage 4, the migration is kind of, they're recipients of migrants. So right now, if you look at Europe, for example, a lot of immigrants from places like North Africa, from places like Sub-Saharan Africa, or even places that maybe from Eastern Europe, which aren't super poor countries, but aren't super rich either. People there are going to be going to places like, cities in Europe. So stage 4 countries would usually be recipients of people from what we're going to call global south, or in other words, your poorer countries. So that's kind of the way that I went in, that approach that within the video as I was just now referencing. Again, I didn't have that in here for some reason. I just didn't put it in my review. Nepal is separated from Pakistan, right? Yeah, Nepal is its own country for sure. Right. So when we look at culture, and we're gonna try to zip through as much of this as we can in the next 40 minutes. When you look at culture, culture is going to be comprised of shared practices, technologies, attitudes, behaviors transmitted by a society. Now, this here comes directly from the APHUG course articulation. This is how the College Board in that document is going to define what culture is. In terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to understand it, is we're looking at again from the spatial perspective, but we can kind of summarize it by looking at the things that we care about as a culture. So the things that we care about are usually deep parts of who we are as an identity: religion, language, ethnicity. Identity is always going to be a part of all of that. And so our culture is best described as the things that we care deeply about, and they can be defined as a group's learned behaviors, actions, and beliefs. Had an example I wanted to give y'all, and I lost it. So when you look at our culture, we live in the United States, we value things like mobile phones. It's a big part of what we do, right? We're always on it, we use it for everything. It is a big part of what we would consider our visible culture. In other words, things you can touch, feel, and hold, and taste, and all this. You've also got invisible or non-material culture, which is going to be like our language, our religion, our values, our ideology. These are going to be the things that we might be passionate about, that might drive us to do the things that we do, all right, on a very, very deep level. So in our country, sometimes I live in the South, all right, so I can tell you straight out, there's a lot of people around here that that value language, for example. If we're going to be in American schools, why can't we be speaking English, for example? Or why do we have to sometimes in the news you'll hear about the Star Spangled Banner being sung in a different language. And even a few years ago, as a Super Bowl ad, Coca-Cola had a ad where they launched a bunch of different people using different languages to sing America the Beautiful. And it was very, very controversial, because as a part of who we are as a country, language comes up again and again as a, do you mess with it, or should people who come to our country as immigrants learn English? Now, keep in mind also that English is not the official language of the United States. The United States as a country doesn't have an official language, believe it or not. States can have official languages if they wanted to. Another example of our material culture, the things we wear: jeans, food, clothing, architecture. Here are some different churches you might see that all look like a very stereotypical Southern Baptist kind of a church. You've got in New Orleans, all right. I heard about this because I had a friend of mine at the school I taught at that went to New Orleans, and they brought back a king cake, all right. And apparently there is like a baby, like a little plastic baby or something that's baked into the cake, and it's super good luck if you get the baby. You know, just things like that. Language can be seen in the way that we express ourselves, and you can actually draw a line on a map that shows where people, for the most part, are going to say "you guys" versus where people are going to say something like "y'all." And then there's other examples of this as well. For example, the big example with Coke and pop and soda and all these different things. An isogloss is and this is a word you need to know. The isogloss is not the word itself, y'all. Don't do like my students and get that confused. The isogloss is on the map, the line you could draw, the border between where people will say y'all and people will say you guys. Okay, so an isogloss would be the difference between where people say crawdad and crayfish or whatever it might be, or the difference between where somebody calls a pancake and a pancake a flapjack or a griddle cake. You guys ever wonder why a McGriddle is? It's because they can't call it a McPancake. That sounds really weird. So it's not the word, but the clear boundary that exists between where people will use different words. It's also not scientific law. There are plenty of people in the South that say you guys. There are plenty of people in the North that says y'all. Because, I mean, who doesn't want to say y'all? It's just easy to say. Language also helps us understand the landscape. Right here, you're seeing a perfect blend of globalization with, yes, I feel you, Kim. Perfect example of globalization, American cuisine, for better or for worse, blended with the cultures where you're going to see this pop up. And yeah, what you're getting here is, in my mind, I don't know if it's exactly as I've never been out, to any of these countries. I don't know if they get the same things we do, but I do know that McDonald's and other restaurants will adjust their menu items for preferences that might be more on a cultural level. And yes, they are preferences, and they are cultural, and they are learned. So, and also I've heard that different flavorings of Coca-Cola might exist in other countries because they grow up with a certain kind of expectation for what that should taste like. And so it's going to be different from culture to culture. Here are some other examples of language on the landscape. You've got street signs, McDonald's. This one here it looks like Arabic as well as English on it. So the expectation that there are going to be people that might not speak Arabic, but usually they might speak English as a second language. And many, many other examples of it looks like Arabic. You also have different types of mosques that you're going to see in places where the religion of Islam is predominant. So this is, again, culture as seen by landscape and architecture. These towers here are called minarets, by the way. And the person who will climb the tower and sing the call to prayer is known as a muezzin. Usually today, my understanding is that these things are done through some kind of a speaker system, much like in the same way that you might hear church bells toll, and usually it's like amplified by some kind of a speaker and not actually a real bell that somebody has to ring. So, and then yet again, you've got your Baptist, stereotypical Baptist churches, little small podunk churches. And yeah, I don't know if you guys are from South Carolina or the South, but you actually do see these. They actually exist. They look just like this in some of our country places. Now, other traits, other than just language and religion, this right here is the places where you can easily find sweet tea. There is a fine line. I mean, I'm talking a fine line between where you can find it easy and where you can't. And it's somewhere right about exactly where the color is. I remember traveling to Minnesota for the first time to meet my relatives, and I'm telling you, we got barely out of Virginia, and you just can't get sweet tea. I can barely live my life without my sweet tea. Thank God for wild strawberry Crystal Light, because that's the only thing that I like as much or more than sweet tea. But you can't get it. Also, you go far enough south in Florida, you can't get it, which is kind of weird. It's true. I mean, I went to Sarasota, I think. I can't remember where I was in Florida, but there was no sweet tea at the time that I went when I was in the 8th or 9th grade. Oh, by the way, the place where you can get tea looks very similar to the place where people say y'all, right? Because of this. Then you got other countries here like Belgium, which is divided between political affiliation and language as well. So people in Wallonia speak French. People in Flanders speak German or Flemish. Excuse me, Flemish, Dutch more or less, and they are completely politically aligned with, Walloons are aligned with what they do in French, and the Flemish are aligned with what they do here in Flanders. And so it's almost like, rather than Belgium as one big unit, it's almost like these regional units are how people trace their identity, and they're very linguistically developed. It's really weird, but even the we got 30 more minutes. Even the governments, the culture, the schools, all these things are divided by language. So if you look at a place like Brussels, which is the capital of Belgium, and it's located in Flanders, the majority of people here speak French, but it's very bilingual. So it's like, I think 60-40 or something like that. And they have different buildings that some would do business in Dutch, and some of them would do business in French, and it's the same kind of business. Like you might have a French bank and a Dutch bank or something, weird stuff like that. So Belgium it's hard for us to understand that, because we don't really think about us being that divided linguistically, but it's a good example of how language can impact everything else. Here's another example of the different signs within Brussels. You've got some there in French and some there in Dutch. Official languages, just terminology here. This is the same kind of terminology you guys can look at, make flashcards for in your review manuals. But when you think about official language, that's going to be the language that the legal matters are going to be done in. So if your country has an official language, that means that all your street signs and all your government documents and things like this have to be published in that particular language. If you have multiple official languages, then they would usually be done in all of those different languages, not just one or two. And then there's also, I don't have it here, but like the standard dialect of a language would be like the way that most people are going to say the language should be properly spoken. In the United States, I want to say that what we would consider to be standard American dialect in terms of our English is usually associated with like a Midwestern accent, because it's very kind of a soft, neutral accent where you listen to it and you can't really hear the harshness that comes with maybe a Bostonian accent, or the drawl that comes with a Southern accent. Languages spread through diffusion. We've already talked about relocation and expansion diffusion, but when you think about it, language is going to expand, or is going to spread the same way. All right. So initially, people are going to move places; they're going to take their language with them. Today, however, you see, how can I put it? You see weird variations of languages emerge due to close contact and interaction and globalization. And what I mean by this would be languages like Spanglish. Now, you might not think that this is considered an actual language, and maybe it's not, but a lot of times, I know that being a teacher for 11 years, I would have a lot of Hispanic students that would come in and would be talking Spanish to one another and literally would throw in English words as they go through. This is very, very common. And the reason is simple. I think I've got an article in here. I thought, yeah, I think, let's see. Nope. Yeah, I do. It's simple, because there are some words and phrases that can be said in English that would be very difficult to say in the whatever language they're speaking. So if you look at this, for example, if you're talking about Wi-Fi in French, it would be, and I cannot pronounce French at all, but it would translate to access without wire to the internet. So if you're speaking French and you're literally saying out the words access, let me get on your access to the internet without wires. That's a mouthful to say Wi-Fi. So they might speak a whole word of French and then say Wi-Fi at the end of it, because it's easier and quicker to say. Now, the thing about this, in particular with French, is that for years and years and years, all the way through my time teaching this class, the French has been very, very adamant at protecting the purity of their language. They don't like a bunch of English words to infiltrate their language. But it's hard to police that, and most places are more or less accepting of it. This lady here recently became France's Minister of Culture, and I wish I had the date of this article, but it's like within the last year or so. She says, French is not in danger, and my responsibility is not, as minister, is not to erect ineffective barriers against language, but to give all of our citizens the means to make it live on. In other words, she is kind of reversing, or you're seeing a reverse right now where France is finally saying it's okay to let words like hashtag enter into our language, because I mean, no one's going to say access without wire to the internet instead of Wi-Fi. And so the French translations would be large phrases. Why not just say hashtag and say it's not going to threaten the way we speak our language, but it's going to enrich our people's ability to speak and communicate in a globalized world. So again, that's very, very new. That's the reason why I'm showing it. I thought it's kind of cool. Light wall period or war period. I don't know if I say it right. This is considered a new language. All right, so we don't see a whole lot of those. Usually, because of globalization, you're not going to see more languages emerge. You're going to see less and less languages continuing to exist. But actually, in this region, and this is in somewhere in Australia, there is a group of people that over time, they combined different elements of English, but eventually created their own language out of it. So if you go on YouTube and you Google light wall period, you can actually see people reading stories, kid stories in that language. It's pretty cool. All right. Let's see. Now, the internet is both good and bad for languages, mainly bad. And the reason is because there are going to be a lot of people that might speak an indigenous language that no one else in the world speaks. Their culture and their heritage depends upon the speaking of this language. But if you are young and want an opportunity to be wealthy or be well off or to live in a city somewhere, you're going to have to choose more or less between, do you continue to speak this language or do you speak something like English or something like French or some other lingua franca that's going to enable you to interact with the globalized world. And so you see a lot of people torn between the idea of, do we continue on our traditions and learn the language of our people, or do we let it die out with the rest of us and speak something else instead? I can't get into this too deeply right now for what we're doing, but language is a huge part of one's identity. There are plenty of YouTube videos that talk about, the last speaker of language dying. My favorite is a TED Talk called TED Cultural Diversity. I can usually remember the guy who presents it. For some reason, I can't remember his name right now because I'm trying to remember it. But if you type in TED Cultural Diversity, you'll see, surely you'll pull up. It's like Michael something. You'll pull up this video. And I would suggest, it's about almost 3 minutes, but watch it because you'll understand what I'm talking about. But these people, they might still dream. When you speak a language and you grew up with it, you dream in that language, even if you speak another one. So to take someone from a village where you got 40 people that speak this language and that's it in the world, and say, if you're going to succeed, you're going to speak English. Well, their children may speak English and the language die with them, but they're going, until their dying day, they will dream in this language. That's a huge cultural identity mark right there. And language is super important. And so also there could be things that we will never know if a language is lost. We can never learn from that cultural group or from what they may have discovered if the language is completely lost to us. And so that is something that globalization brings about for sure. Let's take a few questions. There's no way I'll be able to get to all of them. Sometimes, yeah, if it's the language you grew up in, it's not random though. It factors completely in, Kim, with the discussion. It's a huge part of who you are. So imagine if you were in a place where you knew your language was going to disappear and never be around. You have to literally use the words of someone else to convey the meaning inside your heart. That's hard to do sometimes. I have a sister who is fluent in French, but she's like, maybe she's not like fluent. She can't speak French as well as she can speak English. So sometimes one of the more difficult things for her to do would be to convey what she's trying to say. As she thinks in English, she can't find the French words to tell people what she's trying to say. And she told me before, she feels sometimes like people think she's dumb because of it. So if you ever see a bilingual person, they're not bilingual because they're dumb. They're bilingual because they know 2 languages. So that's something to remember. Essential place theory. I am going to skip that, even though it's got 5 upvotes, simply because we don't have time right now. We'll look at it on Thursday. Taoism is most of the time you're going to see it like this with a T. It's still pronounced Taoism, but it's a religion. It's an ethnic religion within China. It was founded by a person named Laozi. Sometimes you'll see it Li like that, or Laozi. Either way, it's pronounced Laozi. And this could be one person. It could be a compilation of different people over time. But it's a you think about feng shui. That's going to be Taoism. All right, the idea of this endless balance. So there's no such thing as the dualism you might see when you say something like Christianity. There's evil Satan. There's awesome, good, just God. Or Zoroastrianism, kind of the same idea between this cosmic battle between good and evil. And in Taoism, it's symbolized by the yin and yang, which again doesn't symbolize black and white as in good and bad, but black and white as in you need both in order to be balanced. Another thing is, you guys watch Star Wars, the Force is absolutely centered on Taoism as a religion. So again, we look at it and we see dark side evil, light side light good, but what it is more so balance. So think of it like this: where there's white, there's black; where there's heavy, there's light; where there's hard, there's soft; where there's cold, there's hot. Cold isn't bad, hot isn't bad, but you need cold and hot in order to have balance. And when that balance is altered, that's when you have situations. All right, so you can see a lot of this also in different types of animism and spirit-based religions and things like that. So that's kind of in a nutshell. And I didn't hit the little start answering button, but that's Taoism in a nutshell. I wouldn't know. Don't spend your time reading up on this. Don't spend an hour and a half studying Taoism. Know that it originated in China. Know that it's a religion centered on the idea of balance. Know just enough to say basically what I just now did, and let that be it, because I'm telling you, it's a very small chunk of what you need to know for this course. Difference between acculturation and assimilation, that's a good question, and I haven't looked at yet. Acculturation is when a group is going to take on some of the characteristics of a more dominant group. So if you're in English, or if you're in a place where you have like a lot of interaction from, think of a better example. In a place where a group is acculturated, they might adopt certain characteristics of the more dominant group, like certain maybe language, maybe wearing the same kind of clothes is a better example, but they're not going to completely change who they are. You're going to still see a very distinct difference between the smaller group and the more dominant group. All right, that's acculturation. Assimilation is where there is no cultural difference between the smaller group and the larger group. They have completely assimilated. They've completely become indistinguishable from a cultural standpoint. A good example of this would be anytime China has ever been conquered, and they were conquered a lot, the group that conquered them, whether it was the Mongols or the Manchus or whoever, they would assimilate to Chinese culture. They became basically Chinese in the way that they did things. And so that really is the difference. Acculturation, some of the traits might be adopted by the smaller group, but assimilation, there is no cultural difference between the two. All right. We were just talking about migration. Today, you can't look at people and see if they have Irish heritage or German or Italian heritage. They are completely assimilated today. All right. Could I please go over political geography? I went over political geography a lot on Thursday. So if you can, go back and look at that. But for right now, I'm gonna have to go ahead and move on. Even on Thursday, my main focus is gonna be industrial geography and urbanization. However, I will say that there is some really good videos by Carolyn Bednarz. They're long. Her videos are longer, but very thorough. And also, I think that the best AP Human Geography YouTube channel out there right now is Dan Snyder's, and he has his organized by unit. She has hers organized by unit as well. But if you Google Dan Snyder political geography, you'll surely come up with some of his videos. And again, Bednarz, some of my favorite videos from her are in agriculture and political geography. She looks at the heartland theory, rimland theory, organic theory, all these different things we talked about at the end. she does a very good job at covering that. So I would look at that for more on political geography. By the time it's live stream on Thursday, 7 o'clock. We're going to live stream at 7 o'clock on Thursday, and then we do have some cram sessions that you need to be a 50 plus member in order to access, and those are on the weekend. So honestly, off the top of my hand, I don't know what time they are. They're in my calendar. So, but they should be posted on the 50 website. But Thursdays at 7 o'clock. My YouTube channel is called Professor Dustin. All one word. And you'll see my face when you pull it up. I admit I have not put up nearly enough over the last year or so. My YouTube channel is pretty. It needs work. It doesn't cover everything. So Dan Snyder would be probably the better of the two, to be honest. But I do have a few. Like my models videos right now are getting a huge amount of traffic. I've got complete reviews for Unit 2 where I taught my class last year. And I've got other reviews that you can tell I made a long time ago. I wasn't very good at making them. But if it helps you, great. If not, look at Dan Snyder and Caroline Bednar's. Generalized shapes of states. I purposely didn't address that in my political geography review because it's pretty straightforward and covered in the book very, very well. But it is on the course description. Hopefully, I'll if I get a chance in the last maybe 5 minutes, I'll come back to that. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the rest here. Language, there you go, Logan. Thanks a lot, man. You got me. Good job. Language family tree. So this one here gets really, really confusing. You know, I know a lot of human geography teachers that spend way too much time looking at language and religion. I'm going to go ahead and summarize it right quick. You want to know the spatial context or the why of where regarding languages and religion. So you don't need to know the deeper ins and outs and the histories and all these different things that connect these world languages, as much as I would associate them with specific places or specific regions and understand the fusion of like the Indo-European language, for example. And really most of these you just would associate with the region. So what I'm showing you here is the most spoken languages in the world. And notice there are what 75,000 about 7,500 languages on Earth today, and you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. 10, right? And you also see the regions where they are most likely spoken. Ladies and gentlemen, I would know these languages and where they're spoken because they're going to help you understand the context behind so many different things that could be asked, both in terms of multiple choice and free response. And it's not hard. We already know about English in North America. We already know that English started from, well, England and Great Britain. We also know about Crocodile Dundee and the Crocodile Hunter. So we know where English is spoken as a first language. If you look at the British Empire, any picture of the British Empire will show that right here where my mouse is, they spoke English there as a lot of these countries still have English as a second language. India was a colony. A lot of them speak English as a second language. The Philippines, wherever that is in this map, was controlled by the United States. A lot of them speak English. You know why they have call centers in India and in the Philippines? Because they already speak English. So it makes sense that you would have a lot of people fixing your iPhone problems, your Microsoft problems in the Philippines. The Arabic is spoken in what we would predominantly call the Middle East and North Africa. Spanish is spoken in Latin America. So a lot of these things you already know. Look at this. The most spoken language in the world as a first language speakers is by a landslide Chinese. And when we talk about Chinese, we're looking at Mandarin Chinese, okay? The second most, with the most first language speakers, is not English, it's Spanish. That makes sense when you look at the fact that you got tons of Spanish being spoken here, and then like literally all of South America, except for Brazil, speaking Spanish. And then you see English is number 3. And again, this is first language speakers. Now, if you start looking at languages that have that are spoken, including first language as well as a second language, then clearly the obvious one is gonna be English. And you can't really estimate how many people in the world speak English as a second language, but I mean, if there is anyone in Europe, for example, that learns a second language, it's almost always going to be English. People in all these places used to be former colonies. Like I said, they already are associated with English and understand it as a language of globalization, of the language of the internet. So English is a tyrant when it comes to the most spoken language. Many do say that Chinese is very quickly becoming a leading language of the internet. I'm telling you, I would have to see it to believe it if more and more people are going to speak Chinese than English as a second language, because English is already so well established. Now, in terms of seeing world language families from a spatial perspective, notice right here, I've got them all listed out on this map, and they are color-coded to show the dominant language family in each region. Here is what you need to know. Green, no matter where it is Indo-European. Indo-European is the most important one of these language families. I mean, it just is. And the reason is because more than half the world's population today speaks some form of an Indo-European language. So that's the reason why you need to know more about that than all the others. Also, the Romance languages are all European languages and make up some of the most spoken languages on Earth. Actually, weirdly, maybe just Spanish is on this top 10 list. So maybe that's not fail Dustin. But anyway, when you look at this region, we already talked about how this is Islam. Well, we know that's the Afro-Asiatic language family. So associate not Islam, I meant Arabic. Associate Arabic with Afro-Asiatic. That's all you need to know about that and where it is. Okay, so I would know where language family is. Associate with Afro-Asiatic with Arabic. All these different places where you speak English, associate that with Indo-European, Spanish, Portuguese. And when you look at the Romance languages, you've got Portuguese, Spanish, French, Romanian, Italian. Those are the big five you hear about. But there's like 40-something Romance languages. I wouldn't know all those. You don't need to. Know the big five and know where they're being spoken in Europe and also in the world around you. For your African language families, there are actually multiple language families here. I wouldn't spend an hour and a half memorize them. I really wouldn't. It's not going to be that important. I would spend time. I would know Mandarin is the most spoken language in the world. It is of the Sino-Tibetan language family. Japanese is its own language family. The Korean language family is lumped in this one here with the Japanese. Also, know over here where my mouse is. This here is Basque. They don't trace their language in any way, shape, or form. It's not related at all to Indo-European. It is the only remaining European language that has no connection at all to Indo-European. So here's my quick guide to what you need to know and how you need to learn it. Now I'm going to go over it really quick. Know the language families associated with the most spoken languages on the previous slide. So again, I would look at this map and I would know these languages in conjunction with that map right there. And be able to visualize and be able to call out, some of the countries where these things are being spoken. Just a few of them. You don't need to know all. Know that there are more speakers of Indo-European language than any others by far. Just a simple fact. The continents and regions where Indo-European languages exist. So that's going to be the Americas, Australia, Asia, South Asia, Europe, basically places where a lot of people live, aside from your East Asia where they're speaking Sino-Tibetan. Know enough about imperialism and diffusion to be able to make connections between imperialism and, say, English and French. A perfect example of this is if you look in Africa, English is spoken by a lot of these people as a second language. French is spoken by a lot of these people as a second language. It's because of imperialism. Spanish is spoken over here, and Portuguese because of the age of exploration, the 1600s. Let's see. Make religious connections as well. Arabic and Islam, they diffused together. In fact, according to Muslim faith, the best way to understand the true words of God, and the reason why the word of God was rewritten by Muhammad, is because it needed to be in one language diffused directly from God himself. And that's what they believe. And so Arabic is the language that the Quran was given to Muhammad. And therefore, if you want to really know the words of God, you need to know Arabic. So the language and religion actually diffuse together, which is why this map here that shows where Arabic is being spoken is also where Islam is going to predominate in this region. Now, keep in mind that most Muslims live in Indonesia and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and they don't speak Arabic there. But you get the point. In English, most of the people in the English-speaking areas are going to be Protestants. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all Anglicans, but in places where Protestantism is today, a lot of them are going to be English-speaking countries. It's just a connection, and that's unless you're looking at Europe. If you're looking at Europe, it's going to be anywhere to the north, like your Germany, your Scandinavia, your Great Britain. All right. How I learn all this crap? The way I would do it, I would set aside an hour, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Print off some blank maps. Label the maps where the most spoken languages are. Take another map and label the countries or color the countries that are going to be where the languages are going to be predominant, and then quiz yourself. Literally hold up a blank map with different colors and read out to your friend which regions or countries are speaking this language. And I'm telling you, man, you do this with fidelity in about an hour and a half, you're going to know them enough to remember them for the test. Then you can do the same thing, by the way, with religions. Repeat steps 1 through 4, but use the language families instead. This way, you get to know which language families are associated with which individual religions, and you're not memorizing all of them. Y'all, remember, you're not memorizing all of them. You need to know these languages in terms of the regions and countries where they're predominant, and these language families. And that's it, man. About an hour or two, you got them all memorized. So, you can do it in a group, you can do it in a study session. The week leading up to the AP exam in my class, I would always let students work to whatever they felt like they needed to work on. Figure out a way to put it together, get with your friends, and learn these things. Also, I would know the Romance languages. You can find maps of Europe that show you where the Romance languages are, and do the same thing. Print off the map of Europe and be able to label which Romance language is predominant in which region. And you also need to know that English is a Germanic language, not a Romance language. So a lot of people say English is a Romance language. It is not. It is not. It is not. It is heavily influenced by French, but it is not a Romance language. Hint: the point isn't to know where all the language families are, but to understand the spatial connections, right? So don't worry so much if you don't memorize them all, but you understand how language in these regions connect to religion, culture, and globalization, political geography, ethnicity, etc. You can associate language or linguistic diversity with the characteristics of the various cultural realms. And I thought that had that cultural realms map in here, but I don't guess I do. All right. Any questions about that? Unfortunately, I've pretty much run out of time, but I feel like I got through most of it except for the religion directly. And I made it a little further. I mean, I made a good distance. I didn't make it as far as I would have liked to. I've only got about 2.5 more minutes, so I'm going to finish up by looking at a few of these questions here. Okay, so the central place theory. The book does a good job at showing the hexagons versus something like squares versus something like circles. The reason is because when you're looking at the central place theory, it uses a nodal approach to explain why people respond or why people interact with certain places where services can be found, usually larger cities. And the larger the large city is, the more, I guess, unique the services that they offer are going to be. So with hexagons, you can measure that overlap more effectively, but with squares, you wouldn't be able to spatially see why one central place might have more impact than another, because everything is going to be equidistant, which doesn't work out well. With circles, the different regions would overlap so that for the sake of the model, it would look extremely weird if you're trying to measure people's, I guess, pull to a certain central place. The way this might work in terms of the landscape is if you look at Atlanta. If you go to, let's say that Atlanta is going to be the big city shown in the central place theory. Atlanta would have the Falcons. They would have the Braves. They would have Legoland and all these different things that you can't get in just any run-of-the-mill city. So those services are going to be, they're going to pull people from far and wide. And then outside of that, you might have a place like Columbia or Augusta that has movie theaters and fine dining and stuff like this. So you wouldn't go to Atlanta for that stuff. You would go to Augusta or Columbia for those things. So the hexagons do a better job at showing those spatial connections, because like I said, there's no overlap, and it also does a good job at showing the relationship between smaller and larger cities due to the different shapes that the hexagon can have. So that right there wraps me up. I am going to be talking about the central place theory on Thursday. If you guys can come. Please let your friends and teachers know that I'll be here at 7 o'clock on Thursday, and I'll see you guys next time.